Comrades and friends, it's always an honor to be among you. I don't know, it's much closer than my family to me, all of you. And it's hard to explain whatever I really feel in English, but I try my best to explain, and I hope if you don't understand, please ask me and forgive me for not explaining well, especially after speaking a militant talk on the question of housing. In such a big country, if there was a question of housing in China, I would understand. But only capitalists could cause this problem of housing in the United States. That socialist system would be hard for them to solve in places like India and China. I don't want to go more to that, but I got so excited that I couldn't even. Let me start with a quote from the Reuters and New York Times. It's important to see that the Reuters says right after the nuclear deal with Iran, now the struggle in Iran is going to be the major issue. I don't read the whole quotation, but it says the agreement welcomed by Iranians eager for lifting of sanctions and improved living standard has increased the popularity of President Hassan Rouhani, alarming hardline allies of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. They fear Rouhani could challenge Khamenei's power if Iranians grateful for the deal that may bring jobs and prosperity, reward the president in the votes early next year for parliament and the assembly of experts, a clerical body with nominal power over the supreme leader. So that's clear, shows you what Obama's restoration position is, to divide and conquer Iran by nuclear deal or aftermath. Another quote from New York Times says, we have announced that we will not negotiate, it says the two leaders are offering starkly opposing vision of Iran postal deal future, reflecting their divergent attitude toward the great Satan. We have announced that we will not negotiate with the Americans on any issue other than nuclear case, Mr. Khamenei said this month, speaking to a group of hardliner students recently. He was even more explicit, telling them to prepare for the continuation of the fight against America. So that's another quotation. So it's clear how important is the debate inside Iran, where Iran is going to go after the nuclear deal. If the nuclear deal has been approved completely by the US Senate, which we know they cannot veto it anymore, and it's going to be passed, but there's a question how it's going to be approached inside Iran. But to start, I tell you, after 37 years of the revolution, and I was there from the beginning of the revolution, all up and down, so many things, this debate is the biggest national debate inside Iran. Last month and a half ago, maybe thousands of articles has been published in Iran from different factions, looking at the deal with different point of view, fighting. There's a sharp struggle inside Iran between the factions, and it's a very complex struggle because it's going to transform Iran's situation after the nuclear deal. After the nuclear deal, I don't know, I wouldn't compare with the deal with the Cuba, but there is also similarities. There is also with the deal with Iran, any deal with the countries after revolution, which United States was unable to overthrow them by military force. They start penetrating inside. That's the major goal. This is the goal they're going to go, and they explain it here, and I'm going to go through that. So it's a major debate inside. So if comrades have if I want to talk about this struggle inside Iran, I can talk 2 hours. But I'm going to be brief, very brief, just point to the important, just mention important points. If there is question, I'm more than happy to answer any detail, because I've been following up so closely. Every night, every day, and every moment of my last 2 months to see what's going on and what's going on. Okay. As far as the opposition, which some of them call themselves Marxist, Leninists, and some of them don't say Leninists anymore after the demise of the Soviet Union. They gave up to the class position of Leninism, which is Marxism doesn't mean anything without it. So, and then they was for overthrowing the government, something that Workers' World Party, as a Marxist-Leninist party, never took such a position. And 37 years of shows which one they right. Now they're becoming more than a joke, than even a left group. So they're saying now Iran submitted, we predicted that 30 years ago. So I'm not going to talk about that. But it's so clear, so wrong, and it's not even worth it to report. And they are small groups, and they really have not such a influence inside Iran. Unfortunately, Iran, but there are Marxist-Leninist groups inside Iran who are taking good position, right position for 37 years. But even then, they have issue inside themselves, how to analyze this nuclear deal. There is a struggle inside the Marxist-Leninist or working class groups, the vanguard, not the working class. There's a struggle how to approach this nuclear deal. But let's go first to the faction inside the government, Islamic Republic of Iran, and inside the society, especially those who completely defend the Islamic Republic of Iran. There are Muslim left in Iran, led by people like Jalili, the chief negotiator of the nuclear deal during Ahmadinejad, and also Ahmadinejad group. That's one section. I call them revolutionary left Muslim. They just a second student, workers, peasants, and they are a lot of them. You know, they are a big faction of the society. They are extremely critical to the deal, to the nuclear deal. They said we have sold out Iran by this nuclear deal. That's what they say. I'm quoting them. I'm not saying that they right or wrong. I'm just saying this fact. And they write in very detail of the nuclear deal how Rouhani's group gave up our right, which has to be recognized, and we do not need the American to recognize our right to development of nuclear technology. This is our right, and we got it, although they sanctioned us. We had 20,000 of centrifuges, and we had enriched to 20%. We did not have to give up so much. They said we gave up so much, and we gained a little. This is the left faction of the right faction, headed by people like Rafsanjani, which Rouhani is a group of that. They think the deal is a great win, and they think it's a win-win deal between the United States and America, 5+1, of course, and United States and Iran. It's a great deal. And you know Rouhani government put all the effort in the election of 2014 or 2013 that in order for economy to develop in Iran, we have to negotiate with United States and 5+1. We have to have the nuclear deal. If we don't have the nuclear deal, the economy is going to go more and more down, and we're going to be bankrupt. So we should have the deal with it. So they call it a great deal, and they call it win-win deal. The left, Islamic, says there is no win-win left with imperialism. The left Islamic says we don't have it. You have to explain who wins in this situation. And the third position is led by Khamenei, the leader, which I think is the most smart position, the most anti-imperialist position among the factions. And that is which do not focus attacking Rouhani and his team, do not attack the deal, the nuclear deal, straight, and you always attack U.S. imperialism for its imposition of the forceful retreat, or whatever you call, to Iran. And with that position, what he does, he doesn't let, because what happened after the Ahmadinejad and the sanction which doubled in 2012, middle class of Iran were become more and more against Ahmadinejad and more for the nuclear deal. That's why Rouhani won the election. So there is a division in Iran about how we're going to approach United States and the future. Are we going to coexist with the United States or no? Or are we going to fight? What's going to happen? So if you take a hard position against Rouhani and Zarif, the people are going to be divided. And this is what the United States wants. And you can see from the quotation. So Khamenei is trying to avoid that. Although he always supports the team, the nuclear team, the Rouhani's team for the nuclear deal, but at the same time, more than maybe 20 speech, he sharply criticized the United States. And he says, we're not going to let them come to investigate, to talk to our scientists. We're not going to let them come to the military secret, which is against our security. And we're going to have to develop nuclear technology, at least in the science and knowledge. We cannot stop that. This is our right. We're going to do it. And also, we're not going to let the United States to penetrate economically into the country. So I think his position is basically uniting the most of the people you can against U.S. imperialism. And at the same time, isolating the compromising bourgeoisie, which says comprador tendency, and no classic and no liberal plan for the economy to sell out Iran. There are some big bourgeoisie, and very corrupt in Iran. And it's very, very dangerous in that situation. These are the three main factions in Iran. There's also, it's not this. It's a very complex position. There are between lines, there are those who close to this, there are between this faction and that. But these are the sharp factions which they are fighting each other about the nuclear deal. But what happened? United States says because of sanctions, we got Iran into the table. I do not agree with that. There is some truth on that. The sanction really hurt the people. But it was not Iran who started the negotiation. It was Obama administration who started the negotiation. He wrote a letter to King Qaboos from Oman to tell Khamenei that we are ready to accept Iran peaceful nuclear technology, but we're going to sit down and talk. And then Khamenei gave okay, and that happened in 2000, before election, 10 months before the election. So the deal started not as a result of the submission of Iran and sitting to the table. It basically happened because the United States, especially Obama administration, changed the tactic of regime change in Iran. So basically, this is why it happened. It didn't happen because of Rouhani was elected. Of course, one more thing about the left faction in Iran says Obama is taking advantage of the Green Revolution of '88. The Green Revolution goal was to bring Rouhani group into the government. And they called that purple government, not green government. So they called it purple government, Rouhani's government. But I don't think that's also, not that Obama count on the bourgeoisie inside Iran. And that's the major tactic was regime change. But the reason he started negotiation was because his view of the world situation, the major contradiction was China, Russia, and Iran was not the major contradiction in the view of Obama administration. And there was a chance in Iran, because of the strong bourgeoisie in Iran, to eventually change Iran after years, 10 years. That's why the deal is about 10 to 15 years, give time. Because Obama administration wants to check to see how much Iran is going to change towards the West and become westernized more and more and more. So these are the three ways. I'm not going to talk what I think exactly about Barjam, but if you ask me a question, I will explain. Basically, I think Pari, I read about 10 articles Pari wrote since a year ago by Fred, Sarah, Ditsa. Basically, the all correct position. This deal was an achievement, not a victory for Iran or victory for United States. It was an achievement for Iran, because after 37 years, U.S. agreed that they cannot attack Iran. They cannot win anything by sanction. In this aspect, it's similar to Cuba. After 60 years, it was Obama and United States who gave up the old way of dealing with Cuba. Now they're hoping that they can penetrate inside Cuba and change Cuba. Of course, we are more trusted because there's no bourgeoisie in Cuba, at least right now, but there's a big bourgeoisie in Iran. And so we have to be a little bit more worried about Iran, although I'm not pessimistic, because radicalism in Iran is extremely strong. Anti-imperialist tendency is unbelievable. Iran is a revolutionary society, although there's a middle class and bourgeoisie. The Theoretician economic theoretical no liberal and no classic idea is spread so badly in universities. But as you go to the Sepah, which is the army force, and besieged with a million of people, or 10 million, they are revolutionary. That's why when the communists of the Jordan went to Iran and visited different groups, they wrote an article I read. They said, we were in Iran, the revolutionary have the upper hand. It's not easy for the imperialists to take Iran. But we all know what their goal is. We know what Rouhani wants. We know what Rafsanjani wants. But he was telling the comrades in Jordan, one of the names, that we have to be optimistic about the situation in Iran. Let me see if... Okay, so let me just come back to the Marxist-Leninist point of view now about the revolution. Since October Revolution, which was really the biggest revolution in history of capitalism, and it started moving toward socialism. All the revolutions, because of the defeat of the revolution in Europe, confront this problem to deal with capitalism. That's how peaceful coexistence theory of Lenin was created. But honestly, it was the position of the proletariat and even anti-imperialist government in national liberation movement to live peacefully. But the United States and imperialism never coexist peacefully. Even when they are in diplomatic talk, they plan in war. Right. And then when they plan in war, they plan in subversion through economic penetration. Right. We know what the hell they do. But at the same time, peaceful coexistence is a victory for any anti-imperialist movement. That means they defeated imperialism by using military force. So I think that's why I agree with Sarah when he says it was an achievement for Iran. Whoever doesn't address that is going to downgrade the level of resistance of the Iranian people, people of Syria, people of Lebanon, people of Iraq, and the resistance for last 36 years. At the same time, we have to be careful. The major goal, Khamenei said that maybe in the last 10 days, 20 times, that we have to be careful for the penetration. We're not going to let the Americans penetrate in Iran. I think tactically Iran has defeated the regime of sanction. And that's a win for Iran. They cannot impose sanction on Iran anymore. They try to penetrate. And they also, at least for now, they took the option of attacking militarily to Iran. And I make my last point, and I finish, wait for the question and answer. The last point is that everything may change. It's not a very reliable deal, this nuclear deal. It's not even as reliable a deal between China and the United States. Both deal between Cuba and United States. And Iran and the United States can be changed to the war situation and sanction situation again when the most fascist and right section of the ruling class in the United States wins the election. And so it's not a deal that completely we can say is going to go through, and we're not going to be fighting against war and sanction. No, it's not. We're not sure about that. It could go both ways. Even in Tehran right now, there is a deal that Parliament is going to vote on that. And I tell you honestly, 70% of Parliament is critical to the deal. And they think we gave so much and we gained a little. So this very, very sharp criticism. And they even may come say, if the sanction is not removed completely, we're not going to go to the deal. But there is one question. Whichever, United States or Iran, doesn't go with the deal, it's going to put itself in a very bad situation in the world situation between, because China and Russia are also happy with the deal, because now they can communicate with Iran economically. Pakistan just had a deal with Iran for $5 billion, which you couldn't do it before the sanction, before. So we're going to follow up, we're going to be careful, we're going to watch the situation, and we're going to analyze it from the class point of view to see what's wrong. The shortcoming of Iran is we do not have a working class party. It's a real shortcoming, especially now. There is no economic plan from working class point of view. And that's the weakness. That's where Cuba is much more safe than Iran, at least to my opinion. I'm sure if the ruling class in Iran, even the anti-imperialist section hears that, it's going to get very upset, but this is what it is. There's a big bourgeoisie in Iran, corrupt, it's unbelievable. Even not the national industrial bourgeoisie, is merchant bourgeoisie, the most backward section of the bourgeoisie in Iran, which has a plan. They love the world capitalists. They're going to engage with them, get close, and become one of 100 multi-billionaires of the world. So we have a couple of Iranian too to come to the crowd and enjoy that. We do have that situation in Iran. Okay, so I'm going to finish here, and I'm really ready. I hope I could explain a little bit about the situation in Iran. It's more complex. It's, the political power structure in Iran is very complex. For comrades in the United States, it's very important to know the political power structure and the way Iran makes decisions. It's very important. If you don't know that, you're going to make mistake in analyzing Iran's situation and predict the future. If there was chance, I will explain that, but it doesn't go straight to the nuclear deal. It's true about all problem in Iran, how Iran political system makes decision, and how much that political making decision is safe. It keeps Iran safe against imperialism. It's a very major question. If we come to the answer in question, if people want me to explain the complex political structure where supreme leader stays, where the parliament stays, where the others, there's so many groups in power structure, assembly of experts who choose the leader states, how they make the decision, what is the majority between the anti-imperialist, radical, reformists, and others. These are a major issue that could be explained some other times, but I'm ready to explain if anybody needs to know exactly a little bit about the power structure in Iran. Thank you.
In opening up, talking about Iran, I want to start with Iran has long characterized U.S. imperialism as the great Satan, right? So in evaluating the Iran nuclear agreement from here within the U.S., to use another popular term, from inside the belly of the beast, we need to ask, Has anything fundamentally changed in the approach of U.S. imperialism toward Iran? If we're talking about this nuclear deal, has anything changed? Or has it changed toward any other country, including Israel and Saudi Arabia, who both opposed the deal and are U.S. proxies in the region, and who feared losing their position, that this would be a setback? Is the great Satan less of a threat a day after Congress passed this deal? Is it less of a threat to Iraq or to Syria or to Iran, of course, to Venezuela or Cuba or throughout Africa? Have they stopped plans to encircle China or expand NATO right to the borders of Russia? Is Homeland Security tamping down repression here at home? Is institutionalized racism any less today? I think everyone here would agree, U.S. imperialism is still the greatest threat for the people of the entire planet, including the people right here. So what's the significance of the agreement? Is it meaningless? And why all the debate? See, this is why the debate within the ruling class about this agreement. Among Congress, millions and millions of dollars in ads, and TV was just consumed with it. Now, for an oppressed country under siege for decades by U.S. imperialism, any signed agreement, any agreement, it is an accomplishment, as this was what Azin was saying. And in the same way that we know if the workers gain a union contract or any concession from the bosses who wants to destroy the union and fire all the unionized workers and not give a penny more, if they get a contract, that's an accomplishment. It's not the end of the class struggle, though. And it doesn't mean they won't try before the ink is dry. Before the ink is dry, they won't have 10 other plans that they're also right up their sleeve and they want to go forward with. The U.S. government, the intelligence agencies, the aircraft carriers, and especially the media, which is so full of war propaganda, are no less hostile today than they were yesterday. So that's important to recognize. The fact that U.S. corporate power, Wall Street, big oil, the largest banks, and international financial institutions realized that they couldn't continue the sanctions. Now that's worth taking note of, because certainly they tried and used every form of sanctions beginning in 1979. From the very beginning of the Iranian Revolution, there have been one form of sanctions after another. So why could they not continue? What really ended these sanctions? The Iran nuclear agreement, there was 2 years of negotiations. This is a form that it took, with 6 countries, over how much nuclear energy Iran would be allowed. Now, the right to develop nuclear energy is guaranteed to every country in the world, except Iran. For Iran to develop nuclear energy, the claim was this is a nuclear weapon. We know what you have up your sleeve. We know what you're hiding in bunkers. And all of this was a nonstop propaganda. But it was never about nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't have and never had nuclear weapons. So who are these 6 countries negotiating with Iran? There were the 5 members of the UN Security Council. That's the US and Britain and France and Russia and China. Russia and China have always been against all forms of sanctions from day one, but they were part of the negotiations. And the 6th country was Germany, another imperialist country. And that's why the talks were called the 5, meaning the UN Security Council, plus 1, Germany. The 5+1 talks went on for 2 years. Now, Deirdre Griswold, the editor of Workers' World, an editor of Workers' World for 50 years, I think, in the past issue of the paper, quoted a meeting of some of the undecided members of Congress, who were those who were kind of sitting on the fence, with top diplomats from France and Britain and Russia and China and Germany. Now, a meeting like that, when has that ever taken place? And they told them, these diplomats told these Congress members bluntly that they would no longer honor U.S.-imposed sanctions on Iran. They said, we're not returning to the negotiating table. This deal is it. It's the best you're going to get. We want to do business. There's profits to be made. In other words, imperialist competition and determination to move forward, and feeling that this was really, at a time of growing economic crisis, this is one more thing just gumming up the works. They said, this is it. And the U.S. realized they were going to be out of the picture. It's also a sign, though, that the economic domination of U.S. imperialism is slipping badly, as we all know. And they no longer have the ability to call the shots, also through the IMF or through the World Bank. Now, this slipping economic power is sometimes masked by terrifying use of military power, arming mercenaries, CIA, and subversion. But they can no longer unilaterally call the shots and enforce it. Now, why is Iran considered a threat to the U.S. ruling class? Since the time of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Under the Iranian monarchy, the United States government and the Iranian government were the closest of friends. And big U.S. and British oil companies, they ran Iran. They absolutely did. The Iranian Revolution, as all big revolutionary upheavals, explosions, it inspired oppressed people all over the world, but especially people throughout the Muslim world. And that was a big, big threat. The U.S. recognized it right away. How do we stop this? They did everything they could to foment the Iran-Iraq war, arming especially Iraq, then both sides. Everything they could to destabilize and to pull Iran down was done. They right away realized the danger of Iran nationalizing its oil and gas, because it wasn't just a pro forma nationalization, which has happened in some countries. Nominally might be in the hands of a particular government, but it's really all sweetheart contracts with U.S. oil companies, and all the revenue gets tied up in weapons, U.S. weapons sales, and it's deposited in U.S. banks. Iran cut that. And throughout not only the Shah and the Iranian monarchy, but Savak, the brutal secret police, they opened the prisons. They also threw out the huge U.S. military bases and the secret agencies. And it was a sharp rupture, it was a break, in which, as a whole, the Iranian people were taking part and making huge demands at that time on this new government. So it was a new day. Now, has Iran ever been a military threat to the U.S.? And was that ever the real issue? There's a propaganda issue, what's put forth again and again in the media, and then there's a real issue. It's important to know that the sanctions on Iran began long before Iran restarted an old program for nuclear energy. The nuclear energy program actually began when there were friendly relations between Iran, the Iranian monarchy, and the U.S. in 1957. And the U.S. even supplied uranium and plutonium. In 1970, there was an agreement for 20 nuclear power plants and nuclear processing. Imagine that. And all of this ended, all the contracts, as much equipment and everything that was in the pipeline at the time of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And that program didn't restart, and on a very slow basis, until the mid to late 1990s. Now, in 2003, at the time that Bush was claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, a lie that led to the invasion, the total destruction of Iraq, Iran was also put on the hit list, and the claim was that Iran was building weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons. Now, the sanctions, though, predate this by decades. The first sanctions were at the time of the Iranian Revolution, 1979. And there was a freezing of all Iranian assets held in U.S. banks. Now, this is absolute piracy. It's theft. All Iran's money held all over the world, and an oil, that's exactly a country that is exporting oil, that revenue is tied up. It was all seized and frozen. Then there were intensifying sanctions in 1984, in 1996, sanctions against both Iran and Libya. It was called the Iran-Libya sanctions. In 2004 and 2007, each a new round and refining and further efforts to strangle. So the sanctions took place under Carter, Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., and Obama. Republicans and Democrats were united on this policy. And all of them were agreed that Iran was really a threat because Iran had nationalized its oil and gas and was determined to build up and modernize the country. The first sanctions weren't in any way, made no mention of nuclear. It was to stop Iran from getting any parts, and they really pursued every other country, any parts in building their own oil refineries. Because here was Iran exporting crude oil, and then they had to import gasoline and all of the oil products, everything, plastics, everything, because they didn't have refineries. That shows the level of underdevelopment and also the way in which wars are carried out every day on developing countries around the world. It's fine for the extraction of wealth to take place, but the money and the development is all tied up in the imperialist centers. So it was a big effort to stop Iran from developing its own oil refining capacity and from building its own industries on a huge realm of areas. An effort to stop Iran from modernizing its infrastructure, including irrigation and roads and electrification. In building schools and universities. Iran was isolated from every academic organization almost in the world. The exchange of journals and publications and conferences that goes on. Science labs. And at the same time, there was a real effort in Iran to continue this and to develop the country. To modernize agriculture, develop irrigation, full electrification. Huge gains were made in literacy, where there was majority illiteracy, particularly for women. And now 60% of university students are women. And there's a huge number of university students and full literacy in Iran for the whole population. That's a big accomplishment for a developing country. Now, the question that happened then in the U.S. ruling class is if they were going to end the sanctions, how to explain this complete collapse of a policy that had been in place for 37 years. Every significant section of the U.S. ruling class and its political establishment recognized the reality of the situation. Their own imperialist allies around the world were no longer willing to do it. So how to carry on this debate? This is where it gets really interesting. They couldn't say, we feel sanctions are wrong. Can you imagine a discussion saying that? So there were I mean, how many thousands of petitions did we see online during this time by MoveOn.org and all different forces that are sort of in the Democratic Party, and also U.S. labor against the war and whatnot. But so many of these statements would have in them that this is the best way to stop the Iranian threat of nuclear war. So it put the whole weight. This is the best deal we're going to get to really put the hold on Iran. Iran is still the danger. And we end the sanctions, but there's a right for the right, picture that, for inspections and monitoring every step of the way. And Iran is making this concession and that concession and this concession, never mentioning, of course, it ending the sanctions. That's quite a concession on the part of imperialism. That's quite a step down. But it wasn't posed that way. So there was an effort, and it was in all of the media, and if you were really following it on the internet, the discussion here was dominated by these voices. There were demonstrations in front of all different congressional offices, demanding that the sanctions be ended and the Iran nuclear agreement be passed. But always the line running through it, and it made it really not possible to participate in these demonstrations, because we agree, sign the deal. But is Iran the problem? And is Iran nuclear weapons threat what should be contained? And Iran doesn't even have any nuclear weapons, for heaven's sakes. And a great deal was made of how the inspectors this would allow U.S. intelligence agencies access into all the Iranian nuclear sites, and isn't that a great thing, and so on. This trickled down so much into the population as a whole that even many people in the left would say that this is an agreement to limit Iran's nuclear weapons. Even if they were for saying, oh, Iran has a right to defend itself, but they had sort of absorbed it being said so many times that this was an agreement about nuclear weapons, that Iran wants nuclear weapons. So we should just know that Iran's position on this, and it's always been consistent, is that they oppose all nuclear weapons, and they want a nuclear-free Middle East. And they say no one can win a nuclear war. It's the end of humanity. We have no nuclear weapons program. There's a religious fatwa against nuclear weapons. But we want our rights guaranteed by international law to develop nuclear energy for industrial and medical purposes. So it's important to know sort of how a country themselves is presenting it. Now, we would also, just to say, in an earlier time, we would support the right of the Soviet Union, China, in terms of developing nuclear weapons, because the U.S. was threatening them with nuclear annihilation. And so it was a way of drawing a line. And the Cold War went on for 70 years, when really what U.S. imperialism wanted to do was destroy socialism in the most brutal way. But that's not what the issue is here. And nothing was ever said in the U.S. media. You think of all these debates and all these politicians for and against, they never made mention of who has more nuclear weapons than the rest of the world put together. That was like not in the debate. Nor did they ever mention Israel's use, that Israel has a whole stockpile of nuclear weapons and has never signed the nuclear non-proliferation. That wasn't in the debate on either side. So here was this fierce debate in the U.S., and yet it was a debate within very narrow confines that totally distorted the issue. And it's important to know when something's been being debated and there's one side that seems to be for the agreement, but we want to recognize that they're completely distorting what the agreement is and what the position of the U.S. is. And so if we're discussing it at all, we want to say the nuclear threat comes right here from U.S. imperialism. And that's absolutely clear. That's who should disarm, for heaven's sakes. Now, also, from here in the U.S., we take the view that always, and let me wind up on this, we want to oppose our own ruling class and its war and extortion on the world. that any victory for the U.S. ruling class strengthens them and weakens the working class movement here and globally. We have the same enemy. We have the same enemy that the people of the world have. Whether it is Iran or Libya or Syria or Venezuela, and every step forward, we all gain. So those are the class terms we see any agreement, and we want to look at it through that prism, because it's important. Any development we're evaluating around the world, we want to use that. We want to oppose the ruling class right here. And at the same time, say we absolutely support the right for this to be a hot, hot debate within Iran. Of course, and why shouldn't it be? As Kazem so well explained, it's one of the fiercest debates. But from right here, we want to demand of our government they sign the accord, because it would only have been a victory for the right wing and for the militarists if it had gone down in defeat. Now, the U.S., when I say any victory for them, the U.S. ruling class has actually been kind of coming up short on victories lately, or any kind of success. Their wars have been howling disasters for the population of the targeted countries. We look at Afghanistan and look at Libya today and Iraq and now Syria, half the population displaced. Imperialism has been unable to secure their hold on any country. They've destroyed countries, but they have not ended in a stronger position with it. So it's important to recognize the difference. Now, I also want to say something about the character of the Iranian government, because we hear so much about, and it's just a constant drumbeat, about the religious leadership of Iran. Now, as scientific Marxists, we've always understood that U.S. government has cloaked its wars in the Middle East. It's really a war on Islam. They have demonized and targeted millions of Muslim people. And they have also used, as a real force in this, the most reactionary Christian and Jewish religious forces. They've gone out of their way also to reinforce and give funding and support in all kinds of ways, including the strongest military support, like in Saudi Arabia. The currents in Islam that are the most reactionary and the most tied to no progressive change whatsoever. That's who the U.S. wants to reinforce, even in religious currents around the world. And they use religion, whether Christian or Muslim or Jewish, to support the most reactionary groupings, and the groupings that will create the most sectarian divisions. So understanding that, but it's also why particularly the targeting of Islam was because there was such a strong current within Islam of anti-imperialist ferment and national and religious pride and anti-colonial sentiment. And it was sort of that melding. It became a real political force together of religion and revolutionary politics. We know, for example, also that here in the U.S. they use reactionary religious currents as a cover for white racists that are just bound up with defending the most racist and sexist ideas. At the same time, we understand, and this is nothing new, that there are progressive and even radical religious groups right here in the U.S. and courageous individuals who've been part of the civil rights movement. I mean, when you think of the role of the black churches in the South, it just an incredible, as a force, as a political force, or in the anti-war movement, the immigrant rights movement, and all kinds of movements for social justice. So we never want to see religion just one way. It's also part of the class struggle. And there are reactionary interpretations of religion, and there are revolutionary and progressive interpretations that become part of the movements for social change. Now, in Iran, it was led by a very radical and anti-imperialist Islamic current that had a strong social justice focus. That's why the U.S. thought it was so threatening. And it was a grouping that was determined to build Iran as independent of colonial and imperialist domination. And to build strong social programs, housing and full free education and good health care. It was not a socialist movement, though. And it's important to understand that distinction, too. There is a strong capitalist class in Iran. And there is a strong middle class of entrepreneurs and merchants and small business people. And that is really who the U.S. and the other imperialist countries want to appeal to. Can they actually get a struggle going within Iran? At the same time, the working class and the peasants and the agricultural workers have been transformed in the last 37 years and are today really have made enormous gains, as I explained, in many areas. I'm glad to be speaking after Kazem, where he described this intense national debate as to what agreements, what concessions. And in all this, there's a debate going on in the ruling class here as to who can they line up, who can they appeal to, who can they subvert, because they are always planning another war. So it's good, actually, that the Iranian people are critical of this deal. That's good, because it means they're on the alert. It means that they don't trust imperialism this much. And they're also looking at who among the business class, among the capitalists, want to make a deal with imperialism against the Iranian workers. They got to be on the alert for this. And they got to be critical of the deal, even while they're maybe for its passing. Everyone is for ending sanctions in Iran. There's no one in Iran who is for continuing the sanctions. But they all want to know what's at stake and how much and how far. So the fact that this is an intense debate in Iran means that they're not pulled in by this, that there's a strong current among the working class that is really keeping a very watchful eye. So, and just to conclude, we do see this as an accomplishment for the Iranian people as a whole, that they have survived decades of sanctions, sabotage, assassinations, efforts at destabilization. We salute their determination. This is an important marker in the struggle. It's not the end of the struggle, and we hope that the forces in Iran will be steadfast in preserving what they've gained and push for more. From here, we demand end all the sanctions, end the threats, end all the conditions, end the military encirclement, and end the wars.
On approaching the nuclear deal, there's 2 points to that. One is that, as Sarah mentioned, revolutionary forces, who 100,000 of them gave their life for this revolution, and especially among the poor, they are the majority. They are mobilized in Basij, which is a 1 million soldier group. They call it Basij. And the Sepah, which is, it's not the army, it's revolutionary army. As a matter of fact, Khamenei was talking to them, their leader, recently, why we should be more alert than before the nuclear deal now. So as Sarah mentioned, people are worried, and they right to be worried, because there's a bourgeoisie in Iran who really only think about their own interests, not about the national interests. That's what makes people worry. And then when people are so worried, and they don't see tactical and strategic point and old world situation, they very simply say, are we going to give up? Are we going to submit after all these sacrifices? So they become more and more careful in the deal. And when it comes to the deal, when people read the deal, it's really a retreat, because we gave a lot in nuclear deal. You know, they bring the enrichment to 3.75 from 20%. They stopped Fardo, they stopped Iraq, different side of the nuclear technology. They did many retreat there, you know, so they think it's not a fair deal. When they look at the deal specifically, so they become critical. So there's 2 points, they worry, and they don't like the deal because it's not balanced as far as the concern. But the most important question is about Zionism. I should have mentioned that in the question. And that is also 2 points. One is Iran principle, ideologically and political position. Iran revolution, the founder of the revolution was based on anti-Zionism revolution. No revolution in the world is anti-Zionism. It's anti-imperialism. But Iran revolution was anti-imperialism and anti-Zionism, but always they knew Zionism is a puppet of the, not the puppet, it's a little bit different. Shah was puppet, but it's a state being in the service of United States. You know, so people know that that was a foundation. That's why Khomeini created the International Day of Quds, which is an international day of the people of Palestine. And the Palestinian people, by the way, are not Sunni, Shia. They are Sunni. So all these stupid idea that imperialism says about Iran is dividing the people of the Middle East, is United States who is dividing the Middle East, you know. So Iran is always for the unity of the religious, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Sunni, and all fractions of the different religious who believe one God, you know. They just always they have taught. But another issue of the Zionism is, how do people in Iran argue about the debate in the United States? Against, there is two ideas. One says it's just a fight between bad and good dog, and they both gonna exploit Iran, and they both the same. And there is argument that's from the left approach of the left revolutionary Muslim. And the government says, no, this contradiction is the major contradiction. It's a very, very important, it's unbelievable major contradiction. That's why we have to go to this deal. Again, position of Khamenei is, which he mentioned it last week, he said, I know there's a difference between them, and we know what that difference is, but it's not important. What is important are national interests. We shouldn't look at the deal from the point of view of the debate in the United States. We should look at the deal from the point of the view of the national interests. So that's another position. And the last question, which is a very important question, is it going to be a shift in Iran political position in the Middle East? From the point of the view of the leadership, right from the beginning, when Obama suggested to sit and talk, Khamenei gave the permission to Rouhani, to some of the negotiators to talk, but right from the beginning we said we only talk about the nuclear deal, nothing else, and didn't permit anybody talk about anything else, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon. And in many, many talks he said we're not gonna sell our revolutionary comrades and friends who fight it. We never give up defending the resistance. And everybody knows we arm them, we're going to arm them in future, and all that, and all that. There's not going to be a shift. This is my opinion. But there is going to be tactical shift. How to defend Syria. I think Iran would work with Russia rather than with United States to solve the problem of Syria. So those people who think Rouhani government will deviate from the political structure in Iran doesn't let that happen. Even if Rouhani wants to do it, he can't do it. Because the political structure in Iran makes the final decision. And Supreme Leader, the Khamenei, has more. Even he doesn't have the only talk. No, there is a political structure, ideological structure who makes the decision. So this is not easy to happen. I always tell to my friends who are very worried, I said, Iran revolution is so strong. If that's going to happen, 1 million people should die. I mean, it's going to be an internal fight. It's not going to be easy to give up to imperialists because there are revolutionary forces, although they're not Marxists, but they really are anti-imperialists. They're not going to give up. So I'm very optimistic, but I can't predict the future, but I can say I'm very optimistic. Thank you so much.
Well, this is what's been so good and so helpful for all of us in having a program with Kazem here, because he's really looking at it from the point of view of the working class in Iran. And that's just a perspective we don't often have an opportunity to hear. And even having the insights, because so much of this discussion is, we're really only hearing the debates within the ruling class here. I do want to go back to a point that Monica raised, because sometimes we can forget just how difficult it was to defend Iran at the time of the Iranian Revolution. You know, we remember how difficult it was in an earlier time to defend Palestine, where you needed like literally like an armed guard in order to raise Palestine. But at the time of the Iranian Revolution, they whipped the population here up in its most vicious form. And any kind of support for Iran and the Iranian Revolution, I mean, people would stone you. They'd throw things at you. They'd attack. We had our first election campaign that year that we launched, and I remember Deirdre and Larry Holmes going around the country speaking, and so many of their talks, the commentators, everybody was riveted on the fact that, my goodness, it seemed like the whole U.S. ruling class was united in absolutely denouncing Iran, and here were two Marxists, communists, who were defending the Iranian Revolution. And the demonstrations in a number of places really were dangerous and risky and took real organization. I mean, that's really forgotten now, but it is also a change that has happened in the working class here. That it used to be every war threat, they could just whip up the population, and now they'll do a poll and they'll find overwhelmingly, even the population here, when they did any kind of a poll on ending the sanctions on Iran. And this was interesting also among particularly the Jewish population here. There was such an effort on the part of Israel and the reactionary Zionists to whip up the Jewish population. And then they did a poll and they found 60 to 70% the Jewish population was for ending the sanctions, and of course among the population as a whole, larger still. So it is a different period. That's another sign of the declining position of U.S. imperialism. We got to be even more alert and know that they'll try again and again, but we really were steeled in those early struggles on Iran, and they were quite difficult, and we would flaunt it. I mean, that would be the headline of Workers' World. And you go out and do a distribution. That would be the picket line. That would be, there's an anti-war march. We're going to bring the question of Iran into it. Now, I wanted to address Joe's question, because this is really the nut of the question. And we should, and the reason for the fear is real. We should look back to when China normalized relations with the U.S. Or when China finally, the U.S. ended its block of China's right to have a seat in the United Nations. Here's a quarter of humanity, and they really were blocked from even having their flag at the UN. But when China was finally seated at the UN, had a seat on the Security Council, and then relations were normalized with China, for a whole generation who grew up with the revolutionary ferment of the Cultural Revolution and China being a voice for revolution everywhere in the world, the decision by China didn't mean internally they were ending, that it was all the capitalist road, but they withdrew on international questions around the world. And the struggle with the Soviet Union went further. I don't want to go into all that, but so that the concern comes from a real place that that past détente, Soviet détente with China, with other countries, that can be the subtext. And as Kazim was saying, there is a large capitalist class within Iran who wants to normalize relations. So this may really become a real issue of the class struggle in Iran, even if it takes place under religious cover, because the determination of the people of Iran to stand with Palestine and to stand with Syria. And you can see it every day in every article on the sanctions on Iran. Every commentator says, well, the real question is, will Iran decide to be a force for peace in the region? Will they be for a peaceful resolution on Syria? Meaning, will they step back? Will they be for a peaceful resolution on Palestine? In other words, will they drop Gaza? So, but here's the problem that U.S. imperialism has. They have less to offer than they did in an earlier time. And Iran, the sanctions being lifted, may find it much more in their interests to see. They were stopped from even having normal trade relations because they were cut from SWIFT banking and from all kinds of things. Even relations with China or with Russia became very complicated. All sorts of trade and importing and even selling their oil. Sanctions being lifted, they may feel there's much more to be gained in developing relations with the BRICS countries and with the World Development Bank and so on. That's a Chinese initiative than running to the IMF, for example. So there is a declining position of the U.S. in the region, in West Asia and North Africa, because of the absolute chaos they have created. And even in countries where the destruction is so enormous, every political current hates the U.S. And so they're up against much more than they were in the past. Even those who may want to normalize just business relations or make concessions in order to do more profitable business, they may really be stopped. And it was very encouraging, as Kazim was describing, some of the forces in Iran who were quite determined to make this an issue. So we don't have a prediction. We don't have a crystal ball. We have to know that is what the U.S. wants from the deal. As they say, we want to know what else Iran will do. It means they're going to continue the pressure. And they also continue the pressure in other ways. They say, well, we can always impose snapback sanctions. Now, that will put them in a struggle with a lot of the rest of the world, so it's not so easy. But it's technically true that even in the sanctions, there's all these steps. It just passed through Congress, and after 60 days, there's another step. And will the U.S. unfreeze? They hold billions and billions of dollars of Iranian money. Will they literally unfreeze this, hand it back? You know, they're thieves and robbers. They don't want to give a penny back. Are they really going to give back there was 12 billion originally frozen, but then it was frozen. Lots of other things were frozen over years, and there was accumulated interest and all this and that. They're going to trillions, right? Are they going to really give any of it back? So there's a lot of struggle ahead, and I think that's what we want to be following, and at the same time have great confidence in the ability of people in Iran and around the world to continue their struggle. They have a lot of experience and a lot of determination.